Thank you. So yes, Joseph Enslow. I live on Lane Road, and I'm here on behalf of COAP, which is coap.ca, which is a citizen-led initiative in North Cowichan. So I'm speaking today on item 10.4. It's the gender-neutral language and pronouns policy. I have a few concerns which are mirrored by many residents throughout North Cowichan. Topics such as racism, sexism, discrimination, these are big words. And throughout the last few years, we've heard a lot from varied groups claiming that they are standing up for what they call systemic racism. You probably heard that from time to time. Now you're probably wondering, what does that have to do with language and pronouns? And honestly, I'm wondering the same thing. The changes proposed in 10.4 aren't actually even in relation to gender-neutral language or pronouns. It's actually changing terms related to Indigenous peoples, visible minorities, and racialized groups. It's part of the Council Advisory Body Policy. Now that's important, as I'll refer to it later. The topic of concern is systemic racism, not individual discrimination. I'm talking about systemic racism. Racism that exists within institutions and organizations. As an example of the North Cowichan Council Advisory Body Policy, you can find it on northcowichan.ca. In fact, I would encourage you to visit the North Cowichan website, click on I Want To in the upper right-hand corner, and select Volunteer. So these are citizens who wish to give their time, services, or expertise back to their community. I'm going to read you a quote directly from that page. Council will aspire to give precedence to Indigenous people, people from an equity-seeking group, or visible minority, when appointing members to an advisory body, provided the council meets the expertise required or has demonstrated knowledge. The Council Advisory Body Policy will provide more information. So let's read that again. Council will aspire to give precedence to. So let's check Merriam-Webster dictionary and see, what does that mean? What does give precedence to? Well, it means priority of importance. It means more important than. So directly on the North Cowichan website, we are promoting systemic racism. In plain English, we are informing the public that the council will make Indigenous people, equity-seeking people, and visible minorities more important than those who don't identify with one of those groups. I urge council to not fight fire with fire. Promoting discrimination to combat discrimination is not a good solution. Attempting to boost one group over another to somehow level the playing field is openly giving an advantage or a disadvantage to someone based solely on how they look or present themselves. Please work with the council advisory body to ensure we treat our citizens with dignity and respect. No one should be made to feel that their race, gender, or identity is somehow a disadvantage or an advantage. North Cowichan can do better. And honestly, I'm ashamed to find a real-world example of systemic racism on our very own website, embedded in our own policies. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Mayor and Council. I'm Adriana. I'm speaking on behalf of COAP and its members who asked us to speak against policies and agendas that they don't align with. When I ran for council, I was very ignorant to the fact that council's time would be so taken up focusing on things like words, like what should natural gas be called, or should we change visible minority to racialized? I honestly thought there'd be more work around potholes and road signage. To me, this is not a council matter. If the current thing says that we must change visible minority to racialized, I'm sure that it can be done quietly, as both are inherently racist in wording anyway, so I see no reason to debate this, but then again, here we are. Your website already uses racialized in its wording. We encourage applicants of all ages, abilities, gender identities, racialized identities, ethnicities, etc. Now, while you say this on one hand, you also state council will aspire to give precedence to Indigenous people, from an equity-seeking group, or a visible minority, now to be changed, when appointing members to an advisory body. Now, the whole basis for this policy update states it's because in some communities, the people you're referring to are not the minority, so therefore you need to change the wording. Your policy update states to change visible minority to racialized group who are non-Caucasian in race or non-white in color. To simplify this policy, one could remove Caucasian, as that's not a race, and then just place anyone that is non-white presenting in color will be given precedence, i.e. preference. Many ethnicities are white in color. We are literally normalizing the exclusion of a person based on the color of their skin. I thought we worked hard to end that a long time ago. I know I did. Two wrongs don't make a right. How is lumping someone in one group of people into a preferred group based on a pigment of their skin not the epitome of racism? I will add a caveat to your policy that if someone presents as white but shares their sexuality with you, they then would be possibly added to the precedence group. Or what happens if someone is white presenting but in an equity-seeking group? What are the levels of precedence here in North Cowichan? Is there a scale that we can see? It seems a lot messier than just seeing each unique human for their qualities and attributes that they may bring to the table. Let me give you a personal example. I went to apply for a committee here of which I have extensive experience in the field and would have made me an asset to this team. Lo and behold, I read non-Caucasian and non-white in the preference. I told my kids about it that night. Imagine trying to explain it and justify that policy to your kids. My assumption is that it is socially acceptable to use racist wording against one color these days, and without knowing someone's heritage, lineage, upbringing, etc., they would automatically be put at the bottom of a pile, possibly below someone with less experience in the field based on the pigment of their skin. Didn't a great man once say, "I look to a day when people will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character"? Not only are we against the change, we're against the wording as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you. As somebody who's lived in the Cowichan Valley all my life, close to 60 years now, and has been, faced racism growing up and even in my adult life here, I think the term racialized group is denigrating to us. We've been, racism against us, then we're called a racialized group. I just think that's very, very denigrating to people that have faced racism all their lives. Also, the mayor of Vancouver is in today's province. Mayor of Vancouver today, former mayor, had said he lost this election to a Chinese individual because systemic racism. Where's that racism coming from? Now you're calling us you're calling us as racialized. Is a white person saying he lost because of systemic racism? I just don't get this policy. What we're taking away, definition of visible minority and replacing it with a racialized group. I just think that's very, very denigrating to us. I know most it's Anglo-Saxons that actually come up with these words and without consulting with actually the racialized group. I'm not sure where people that came up with this policy or staff, if they actually talked to anybody, other than doing some research online, that the policies came out from other Anglo-Saxons that probably came up with this. I think we need to take this back. I just cannot support this. I think it's more of a denigration to the racialized groups, and I just cannot support this at all. I'm just even surprised this even came forward with this. Thanks.
Councillor Finlay? Oh, no, sorry, Councillor Estache, then Councillor Finlay. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to state that I'd be supporting the motion as written from the recommendation that's been provided from staff. And mostly it's, we don't want to read too much into documents like this, because at the basis of it is that the policy is about making considerations in the way we think. And those considerations are just being, am I being respectful? And am I making space? And am I providing a safe environment? We don't know those things. So all it's asking us is to make considerations of those that we spend our time with in our work, in our leisure, and who we interact with. And when we say, do policies like this have a place in community? Well, a community is about being in this all together, and a family looks out for one another, and they consider how another person wants to conduct themselves or how they present themselves. So this is just about being respectful and having the consideration of those around us. So I thank staff for just putting this forward, and this is really about us just trying to do our best and create a positive environment. So I thank staff for bringing it forward.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I knew where I was going to vote on this when I read it, but listening to two of the speakers talk about systemic racism, and also listening to the only visible minority on this council speak quite clearly about his distrust of the word and dislike, sorry, of the word racialized. And when I read the word racialized, I thought it was quite a divisive word and quite a harsh word, where visible minority is definitely not nearly that harsh. I am definitely going to vote against this motion, following in footsteps with Councillor Manas. Thanks.
In our research, we did find that the term visible minorities is something that's being phased out, and the use of the term racialized persons is recommended by the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, as well as the other one was the provincial one, which was the Hub. So the Homeless Hub, which is a provincial organization as well, it was their recommendation that we replace visible minorities with racialized persons or communities. So it is not a term that staff designed, and using these two provincial and federal recommendations is why we brought forward the change.
All those in favor? And opposed? Councillors Finley and Manhas opposed. The motion carries.
Okay, I didn't really prepare a great question, but I want to talk to, I guess, the councillors that earlier voted, I guess, yes to the 10.4 policy, the one about the racialized communities. As just a little precursor, it'll take me 30 seconds here. I have two sons. One of my sons looks just like me, fair skin, blonde hair, blue eyes, etc. My other son happens to be dark skin, brown eyes, brown hair, and that's because my partner is Haida Indian, which means that my family is a mix, I suppose. I would really like to ask council, in your review of the 10.4 policies and the homelessness hub that states that systemic racism often contributes to homelessness, drops out employment issues, and this discrimination is why these issues lead to homelessness. I would just love to understand, for those councillors who voted yes to the 10.4, how is it not racist to say that one of my sons gets the advantages of these things and the other one doesn't?
I think the purpose of the policy is to encourage greater diversity and representation on our committees. And I don't know, most of the folks I hear from the community are pretty supportive of that. Councillor Callio?
Mr. Renslow, I'd just like to say that the part of the policy that I voted on was the gender inclusion part of it. And the racialized part of it, I agree the word sounds kind of harsh to me, and it doesn't speak to me as being inclusive. But the thing is, for me, I was not voting on what you mentioned earlier when you spoke to council, and that was the fact that, you know, you were going over our policies on hiring and stuff like that. To me, what was going on with this policy is all to do with what we do back and forth in council and with each other and back and forth with yourself and us at the table. It wasn't about hiring or firing or any of that kind of stuff. It's all about how we treat each other and how we need to be gender inclusive of everybody. So when it came down to my vote, I was not voting on any kind of anything else that was in our policies. I had nothing to do with any of that stuff. And so for me, it all came down to the fact that this is a fair thing to do. And when I had discussions with, you know, my wife and other people, that my friends, you know, the world's changing, and me being 66 years old, I have to change with it. And there's changes that we don't like, and there's a lot of changes that come around that I don't like, but I just have to kind of change with it. And for me, it was all about the fact that there's an interaction between us on council and with the staff and with the citizens who come in here, like yourself, and speak. You know, I don't want to offend anybody. So for me, I see this policy, I don't necessarily agree with everything there. As I spoke to it earlier, I said that, you know, I put an amendment in about how it was worded, And to me, that was important. And the word compelling, to myself, is too harsh a word. It's almost like you're going to be chastised if you actually say, make a mistake. And people make mistakes, especially me. So that's what it was about for myself. So, I mean, I see what you're saying, but for me, when I had the vote, it was about the inclusivity. Thank you.
Councillor Justice, you wanted to comment? Respond to Mr. Ensel?
Thank you.
Mr. Ensel's question?
Well, you're lucky, Mr. Enzo, because in 4 years, I've never seen councillors line up to answer a question, at question period, but the motion is a two-part one. The first part was on adopting a gender-neutral communication policy, and the second one was in 3 different places, replacing the word visible minority with the word racialized, right? Racialized group. It wasn't about whether either of those words would be used. It was about replacing the old word visible minority with the new word racialized group. I mean, you could, agree or disagree with it, but it was based on, as our corporate officer said, recommendations that came from federal and provincial organizations. So it's, as I understand it, just a change of use in the way that many words sort of go out of vogue because they become offensive after some time to some people or something like that. So I think that's what we voted on, just to sort of modernize the language being used and not make a particular change to any policy.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ensel.
Yeah, Chris, do you have an answer for me?
So let's go through the mayor on this, like I'm chairing the meeting.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
a protocol
sorry.
thing.
I was just hoping
It's
to
okay,
get
it's just a
everyone's
protocol
feedback,
thing.
if that's
He didn't put
possible.
his hand up, so I didn't want to put him on the spot, but I'll turn
Your
to.
worship, I'm fine to respond just because my colleagues, Councillor Caillou and Councillor Justice spoke fairly to it. My considerations and everything I do are all about making space, showing respect, and not making assumptions on other people to allow them to make the choice and lead the path they want. So as such, for anybody has the opportunity of freedom to come in here and speak and share how they feel, I want to make that space for it and show them the respect they deserve. So this is just about having a lack of worry that you won't have space to be who you want to be or come forward, and that there's always going to be space at the table for you. And such that you're speaking at the pulpit right now, there's always space for you to be there. So when it comes down to it, that's all these documents are about. We can dig into the words and what they mean and Webster's dictionary and everything, but really, it's just about making space, seeing one another, and showing respect and consideration. So that's why I voted the way I did.
Great,
So,
thanks.
and I thank you.
Councillor Stitch, I think we're kind of restating all our positions from the debate, so appreciate the question, Mr. Ensel, but we're just kind of rehashing the debate we just had about an hour ago, so thanks, everyone. Thank you for the question.
I've got a quick question through the mayor to the staff. Can you tell me the names again? I didn't write them down, of where you got this recommendation, the recommendations from, if you wouldn't mind. And if you can't pull them up, then I can just get an email probably from them. As there are some places in the states that also send out these recommendations. And I just was personally so upset to see the one person that's racialized in this group not be heard tonight. So,
Yeah, Ms. Richards, I'll have to correct you on that. Councillor Manhouse was heard. We have debates, we listen to each other, and then we vote a certain way, but it doesn't mean we're not listening to one another and taking that into consideration.
I hear it, but if I was the only woman in the room and I said, this makes me feel this way as a woman, I was wondering if you guys had asked the First Nations what they felt of that word as well. But it doesn't seem so, that's how it made me feel, anyway. The other thing is, I'm wondering if you would do think of like a survey or a poll for this MX, because that was a really good point that was made, that possibly there's a lot of people that would be not okay with it. So if you just decided to address me in an email as that, I would not be okay with that. So I'm just wondering if there is a way to balance that so that you are inclusive of everyone, but not presumptive that I want to have an MX in front of my name kind of thing. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll turn to Ms. Martineau with regards to the two organizations that you referenced earlier.
Okay, so the first organization was the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, and the other one was the Homeless Hub.
Thank you.
Great, thank you for the questions. I'll turn to the gallery, ask if there are any other members of the public with questions for council. And I don't see any virtual attendees with their hands raised, but I'll check with IT staff just to be sure.
There is not, Mr. Mayor.
All right, that concludes our business, so declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you.